Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll just give it a moment here for others to join. Thank you for your patience. Welcome for those who just came in. We're just giving it a minute for everyone to join. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our first webinar of 2026. Today's session is powered by MedTech Color in collaboration with Edwards Lifesciences. The Prevalence Puzzle. We are so excited to bring forward this conversation today on solving for equity in clinical studies. Now, this topic is not only critical, but it's timely as we look at improving outcomes for all patients. My name is Tennille Jones, and I have the honor of serving as MedTech Color's Interim Executive Director. At MedTech Color, we believe in building through collaboration and excellence, and today represents just that. Now, you all know who I am. We would love to know who you are. Please go ahead and access your chat feature right now. We want this to be an interactive conversation. Let us know who you are, where you're viewing this from, your role in MedTech, and why this topic or conversation is important to you. Next slide, please. For those of you that are new to MedTech Color, welcome. Our mission is to advance perspectives, inclusive perspectives in MedTech by providing a professional home, fostering leadership excellence, and driving innovative solutions to improve health outcomes for all patients. I see the chat. Thank you. I'm pausing a little bit. I see the chat. Thank you so much for participating. So we do this in 3 ways relative to our mission. First, we aim to foster a strong network and community. Next, we provide creative pathways for leaders to be recognized and to grow. And lastly, of course, we address gaps in representation through clinical trials and use of MedTech products. Next slide, please. Now, if you're not already a member of MedTech Color, we welcome you and invite you to join us as a member. Whether you are a MedTech professional, whether you are a healthcare leader, a researcher, or just someone supporting the ecosystem, there is a place here for you. So thank you for being here, and access the QR code on the right-hand side of your screen. We welcome you. We encourage you to become a member, and don't worry, if you don't have time to do it right now, we will provide this recording after this session. Next slide, please. And finally, I have the honor and pleasure of introducing our host and moderator for today, Neda Hanafi. Neda is the co-founder and board treasurer of MedTech Color. She is a recognized leader across life sciences and MedTech industries and has over 20 years of experience from the public to the private sector. Neda brings a deep expertise in FDA leadership, regulatory strategy, clinical research, and she's instrumental to advancing diversity across the entire industry. Neda, I'm going to pass it over to you. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today and leading us.
Thank you so much, Tennille. Good afternoon, everyone. And Tennille, first of all, welcome to the MedTech Color family. We're so excited to have you on board, and we can't wait to see what we're going to achieve together, starting with this first webinar of the year for us at MedTech Color. Welcome, everyone. We thank you for joining us today. So we're going to dive right in. We talk a lot about diversity in clinical studies, and now the momentum is real. We've seen policy shifts, we've seen guidance updates, and industry commitments, as is going to be shared on today's webinar. And all of that matters. So we've pushed really hard to enroll underrepresented populations, but we've run into this major question that many of us maybe didn't anticipate, and is, who exactly are we trying to reach, and how many of those patients are there? Hence the prevalence puzzle. And it turns out that defining the prevalence across diverse and real-world populations isn't really straightforward. The data is fragmented and the sources are inconsistent. And the gaps, particularly for communities that have historically been excluded from clinical research, are quite significant. So today, Edwards is naming the problem. We're offering a framework to solve it, and one that's built on 4 steps, where we identify the available data, evaluating the strengths and the weaknesses, mapping that patient journey, which is so crucial because everything we do is about patients, and then adjusting prevalence estimates and to reflect that population who have often been left out of the studies. So to represent Tiger team members, today we'll share how they are actively working on ensuring representation in clinical studies. Because if we can't really accurately define who has the disease, we will never truly achieve equity in who gets to participate in the research that treats them, and to determine if these products are actually safe and effective for this patient population. So I'm genuinely excited by the conversation ahead, and really because it reflects that every perspective matters, and that there is great diversity in the teams that are coming together to solve this prevalence puzzle. And it's not just one person who's responsible for it. It requires that everyone have a seat at the table. So there's a lot of functional diversity across Edwards right now, from regulatory affairs, clinical research, to biostatistics, health economics, the medical affairs groups, and the commercial team. And each of them touches that main question, who is our patient population, in a different way, but they all hold the critical piece of the puzzle. So with that, I'm going to move forward to introduce this dynamic and lovely team that I've had the honor and pleasure of working with. And you're going to hear from Godfred Marfo, who is a senior manager for the Health Economics and Reimbursement Group in Structural Heart. Maria Thompson, who's Director of Field Market Access for transcatheter mitral and tricuspid therapies. Patrick Bohan, who's Director of Clinical Affairs for protocol development across transcatheter heart valves. And then Cassie Agaha, who's the Senior Director for Clinical Affairs, and that's the patient activation transcatheter heart valves team. And my good old friend, Regina Dival, who's Senior Director of Clinical Affairs. She tried to retire, but Jamie Wheeler saw it better and pulled her right back in. And I am going to hand it over to you, Regina, to talk about our agenda and what's in store. And again, thank you, team, and really looking forward to the conversation. Please, by the way, just put your questions into the Q&A. And feel free to share comments in the chat. We'll be monitoring that and hopefully feeding it forward to the speakers. Off to you, Regina.
All right, thanks, Netta. Had the privilege of working closely with you and MedTech Color over the past few years, and my goodness, it's been a meaningful and impactful collaboration. So today's program will reflect that shared commitment to advancing thoughtful and data-driven approaches that are aimed at fostering productive dialogue across all of our stakeholders. We're so grateful for this opportunity to come together for this discussion. So let's just take a moment to see how we'll spend our time today. We're going to begin with the background, and that's grounded in relevant FDA guidance, key demographic trends, and specific challenges that we're trying to address. From there, we're going to move into a call to action. This will highlight the importance of cross-functional alignment, the current state of disease awareness, where gaps exist between what we know, what we think we know, and what we need to better understand. We'll then introduce the role of drivers of health and data sources, what should be considered in scope, how to think about incorporating these elements in a very practical way. Then we'll walk through a goal-oriented framework, where to start, how to build a structured plan, and to see what success will look like over time. And finally, we're going to look at the operational side. We're going to focus on program development, stakeholder engagement, and communication strategies that bring all of these concepts into practice. So the goal here is to move from context to action in a structured and actionable way. So by the end of this session, there are 4 key takeaways that we hope you'll leave with. First, a clear understanding of how to approach action planning in today's ever-evolving environment, particularly as expectations continue to shift across all the stakeholders. Second, we're going to share the methods that we created for estimating disaggregated prevalence data, and this will help you better understand the patient population at a more granular level. Third, we aim to provide guidance for organizations that are building your own action plans. So there's an emphasis here on structured, scalable, and evidence-informed plans. And finally, through interaction, and I hope you're all interactive, we want to see this chat liven up. We want to learn how the other sponsors are approaching this space. So please offer some examples and perspectives for us to integrate into these strategies. This is intended to be practical, but interactive. Grab your phone because we're going to have Slido question prompts. We want you to have scan the QR code. Please respond to these questions. And now I'm going to hand it over to Godfrey to get us started on the background and the impetus behind this project. It's off to you, Godfrey.
Thank you very much, Regina. Hi, everyone. Right. Taking over. I'm excited to be here this afternoon with you all, and I get the pleasure of kickstarting this conversation about what we did here at Edwards Lifesciences and how we are tackling this humongous problem of underrepresentation in clinical research. Uh, I will start with how did we get started? I think most of you are aware that, or if not, well, you get to be aware today that in June of 2024, the FDA released an updated guidance document which mandated that clinical studies must now set goals to help increase representation of all subgroups that the manufacturers intended to treat. The FDA also went further and proposed that clinical research enrollment goals must be disaggregated by race, ethnicity, sex, and age groups. For us here at Edwards Life Sciences, this was seen as a huge call to action by the leadership of the organization, and I will give a huge shout out to Jamie Wheeler for sponsoring this, and all the leaders that are on here today. And so we got to action right away. And with that, we will transition to our first polling question, and I hope you guys are ready to be involved in this conversation. Our first polling question we would like to ask is, has your organization developed a diversity action plan? I give it a couple more seconds as these answers trickle in. All right. Okay, a couple more. Okay. I think most of you is a yes, which is great. Some of you are still working on it. This is the right place to be, to get a sense of how we've been working on it here at Edwards Life Sciences. Uh, Now I'll bring it to the broader topic of clinical research and representation. I think most of us are all aware of the disparities that have existed, still exist, in our clinical studies. And there have been several publications that have highlighted this persistence of underrepresentation, especially of minority groups. And not just that, also of people regarding sex differences as well. And some of these studies, they didn't just talk about the problem, but also went further and have identified what causes these problems. So they have identified structural, systemic, and operational barriers that have limited diversity, in our studies, and they have also outlined, ways to improve inclusive participation, and all of these becomes very important when your organization or your industry tries, to implement this FDA diversity action plan guidance. For us, it was very helpful to look at some of these resources. Uh, a couple of problems we faced when we delve into action. One was that clinical trials was not representative, and the sort of downstream effect of that is not having women in clinical trials, or having minority groups or people of color, people of low socioeconomic status. Downstream effect of that is that you are not able to generalize the outcomes of your research to everyone, right? And this continues to perpetuate the inequities and disparities that we see in our healthcare system. Okay. So that was a huge part that we need to be able to find strategies, to deal with that from our perspective. And another part of the problem that we encountered was finding data on minority groups and people that have been left out of research for such a long time, right? How do you estimate the true prevalence of a disease in people that have not been involved in research for a long time? That critical data remains unseen. Sometimes not in publications, you can't find them. And so you have to try to find on unorthodox or untraditional means to be able to get to those estimates, to be able to really help capture sort of new data points for other groups going forward. And so what we did here at Edwards, with the support of our leadership, was form a target team for the initiative of addressing underrepresentation in our clinical studies. And this initiative we call Represent. Represent was formed to help develop a One Edwards approach to increasing diversity in our clinical studies across our entire organization. And if you know our organization, we sort of have different business units that we sit in. So having this program that is geared towards a One Edwards approach to solving an issue was very big for us. The aim of Represent is to improve generalizability of our clinical studies. And how we're going to do that was to help improve collaboration among patients, providers, and communities. I think once we're able to bring all these three elements together, this will help move the needle for us. And from the beginning, the mission was clear. We were tasked to create and adopt a unified set of inclusive principles that will help throughout the product's life cycle and will be applied across all business units here at Edwards. Uh, the initiative had multiple work streams, and some of us that you see on here, we were part of the disease statistics and our awareness work stream. This multiple work stream was very helpful to be able to divide and conquer, this huge task. So we had each group working on a specified task, and we all brought it together in the end. The great thing that I would like to call out for Represent was that it was all based on voluntary participation across all Edwards businesses. So we had people coming from all different backgrounds, different functions at the organization, different business units. But the key thing among all of us that we had a passion for addressing inequities in our current healthcare system and industry. And we all wanted to see our communities be represented in clinical studies moving forward, so that we can accurately apply the outcomes of these studies to, patients that look like us, live like us, going forward. We had, teams that were tackling different like structural heart disease areas because as a business we sit in the cardiovascular space, so we sort of broke it all down to be able to tackle all of them. The represent first phase ran for about 10 months, and within that 10 months, we started September of 2024. The guidance came in June. September of 2024, we were ready to go. And by June 2025, we had been able to finalize and present six set of disaggregated enrollment target numbers for all the structural heart disease areas that I showed earlier on. And I think that was a big achievement for us in that short time span. We also had multiple check-ins along the way and multiple presentations from all the different work streams as well, so that we were all aligned on the goals. And now bringing it back to one key sort of issue that we encountered was even though knowing that underrepresentation was due to a whole host of issues, right, which is systemic. Uh, we knew that to be able to provide relevant enrollment targets, one, we needed to trust that the other work streams will work to be able to come up with new ways to sort of help tackle the problem of removing the barriers, to access to clinical research. And then for our work stream, we would focus on, okay, understanding the true prevalence of the disease, one in the total population, also in the subpopulations that we're trying to improve representation in, and try to find prevalence relative to disease burden, right? Because disease burden it's not the same across the entire population. All right. Some subgroups have a higher disease burden, but unfortunately have very low representation in clinical studies. So this led to, the conundrum of okay, what truly is prevalence? Because as you try to get down to providing enrollment targets, it's like, what data source am I looking at? Am I looking at traditional data sources, which is in the literature that doesn't have great representation? And if I want to use non-traditional data sources like claims database or EHR data that we fortunately have access to, what am I looking for? Am I looking for patients that have been diagnosed or patients that were undiagnosed, or patients that are treated or patients that were untreated? All right. So there was a couple of factors that you have to consider once you start getting to work, and I think just the motivation alone and the right people, problems become opportunities, and we kept rolling. Okay, with that, we are on to our next polling question. And our next polling question is, what does prevalence mean to you in three or less words? I'll give it a couple of seconds to see what comes in. I think it's tricky when we say three three words or less, but you just put in what you think prevalence is. Right, right. You have numbers, impact numbers. That's a very key. Disease burden. We have how active a disease is, impact of a disease, understanding disease burden, highest concentration, people affected by a disease, uh, how many with a disease, understanding disease, how active disease is. Thank you all for your thoughts and participation on this. Yes, this is exactly what the situation is. Couple of variations in the definition of what prevalence is, and that's what we encountered as we delve into the task. We can see that all the different federal agencies sort of have a slight variation of how they define prevalence, and it makes it a little challenging when you try to get to the nitty-gritty of how do I capture a number and set an enrollment target for subpopulations. And with that, my section has come to an end, and I'll pass it on to my teammate Maria Thompson to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Godfrey. And hello, everyone. So what I want to speak about today is really looking at the social determinants of health and really not discounting when it comes to SDOH factors. Next slide, please. So as Godfrey mentioned, in terms of one of the challenges, that we face was really knowing that there's a true underrepresentation when it comes to patient populations and being able to truly understand from a demographic standpoint, as you look across various populations, race and ethnicity, how to factor that in as a part of our actual project and looking at the data. So I think it's important that, we recognize that when you look across health and the outcomes associated with it, social determinants of health is huge. We look at not only from biology, looking at genetic factors, but environmental, as well as both social, demographic, and social economic factors. In addition to this, understanding that racism plays a factor with this, structural racism, as well as inherent biases. And all of these have huge implications. It is important to understand that separating race and ethnicity and isolating them, you cannot do that. You have to understand underpinning what is happening when the factors that are underpinning when it comes to these SDOH factors. Next slide, please. So recognizing the data limitations as well as the access barriers also that Godfrey mentioned earlier, we know that from a data source, the challenges looking at claims data, EMR records, the implications when it comes to the limitations that affect the actual data accuracy, it's because of the underrepresentation of these populations. There are huge gaps when it comes to looking at the data, being able to mine that data efficiently. The biases, particularly as we looked at underrepresented racial as well as ethnic groups. All of those have key limiting factors when it comes to prevalence data as we looked at this. Again, access to care, that's huge. We recognize when it comes to coverage from an insurance standpoint, as well as even from transportation, these populations, these minority groups, they have challenges when it comes to even being able to participate in a clinical trial, their caregivers being able to transport them to get that, as well as cultural differences, as well as just with respect to understanding how do we really define and determine what's really the implications along this and being able to have complete data. And then lastly, we recognize if we're having not only underdiagnosed, but underrepresented population, this is truly going to make it very difficult to actually have equitable as well as evidence-based clinical trial enrollment goals. So I think it's important that we recognize to avoid premature enumeration, understanding that when we think about numerating that when you're ready to just slice and dice and looking at the various ratios and the data that you have, you need to understand exactly what does that data represent and where is it coming from and taking that into account. So with that, I believe we have a slide where we're going to do another Slido, a polling question, and we would like to hear from you all just to understand around what are you doing or are you all actually factoring in SDOH as a part of your actual diversity action plan? Okay, I think we gave it a minute. Well, hopefully, if you actually taking your camera, take a picture of the QR code so we can see the responses. Oh, it doesn't. Oh, it's not going to the, okay. If it's not, feel free to just put in your response in the chat. If it's not, okay, we see it now. All right, perfect. Great. We do love to see that you are actually factoring SDOH as a part of your DAP, because this is definitely something that's key and imperative. So with that, I want to turn this over to my colleague Patrick, who's now going to get into the actual methodology that we use as a part of our actual project. So, Patrick.
Did we lose Patrick?
Hey, Patrick, are you there? If you are, you're on mute and off camera. There we go.
Thanks, Neva.
No problem.
We can come back to what happened. So I was really interested to see that response to the SDOH. I think it's a really important issue. And perhaps we can talk about that further in the discussion at the end, because I think it's one of the most interesting things that came across our studies. So, so what did we do? So, Godfrey introduced the different teams, and we were part of the DSA, the Disease Statistics and Awareness Group. And when we were asked to make the target enrollments, the first thing we did was go back to the FDA guidance to make sure we were answering the question we were asked. And we looked there and said that sponsors should utilize appropriate available sources, for example, certain registries that are reasonably expected to be demographically representative, publicly available epidemiological studies, surveys, published literature, and so on. So we started there, and we went to the literature, as many people in the clinical and medical affairs roles would start any new task, but we didn't find that much. We found one really excellent paper from 2024 from Dr. Alawardi, and but we didn't think that was enough to really frame the task. We also wanted to kind of cross check and to logic check against what we're looking at. So we expanded our search to anywhere in the world. And we found certainly prevalence studies, not so much incidence, but we did find some from around the world. And we tried to bring those data into a format that we could compare, contrast with what we had from the Alawardi paper. And it was difficult. It was difficult because mainly because of the variability in reporting categories. Also, if sometimes race and ethnicity weren't reported at all. As we know, the US uses a particular definition of an ethnicity, and it raises questions. For example, studies from Europe or studies from Spain, could we count those people as Hispanic? Or even a study from China, and there's some very large ones and interesting ones, could we assume that that represented the Asian population in the US? Linked to that was the issue of definitions about disease, for example, because we could talk about the prevalence of a particular disease, and Godfrey also showed the areas in which Edwards Lifesciences works. So it's structural heart, and we're divided into tricuspid and mitral, into aortic, but we also have heart failure. And we also, in the aortic area, look at regurgitation. So those four big areas. And between them, there's a large availability. So aortic stenosis is perhaps the most widely studied. And but of course, it's been studied, or largely been studied, in severe disease. So when we talk about prevalence, when we talk about setting goals for our studies, we had to limit it to severe, or at least look for that granularity to break it down between severe and less than severe. And we also had the question of where were we getting the data from the patient? What point in the patient's journey were we getting them from? So we're beginning to see that obviously in our trials, we're seeing treated patients, but in the prevalence studies, we're seeing patients who had diagnosis or not. There are some studies which are showing undiagnosed patients. So the percentages and the numbers started to be confusing, to be overwhelming, and saying, how do we fix this? How do we sort them out? Added to that were the sensation of a moving target. So if in the US, I think it's a positive step, but it does nevertheless complicate our task, is there's the US Census has a proposal to introduce a new category, Middle Eastern, North African. And I think that's part of also one of the things lessons we can learn. I think even just by reducing the percentages of unknown in our studies, we could improve, or at least know if we're improving representation. But if the US were to introduce this new category, that would probably already be larger than some of the smaller ones like Native Alaskan or Hawaiian. And it would change quite a bit the landscape in the US. Also, one of the proposed changes is to collapse race and ethnicity into a single classification. So, Kathy, I'm going to ask you to move my slides because they don't seem to be working. When we're looking at all these data, we said, and we looked, and there's a lot being written and a lot of interesting things being written. And one idea that we had was, rather than set goals for an individual trial, should we set it for an entire program? Because we saw some interesting ideas, some innovation like that. We saw one particular trial called the Recharge trial, which is in revascularization, which is only in underrepresented populations. So it was exclusively for underrepresented populations. And that could be a way to correct the data we have on the intended use population. But that kind of clashed with our immediate need to commit to FDA a DAP for an individual trial. So it was an idea that we had, we'd like to explore more, but right now didn't go any further. And to finish off, I wanted to talk about those SDOH because Maria, I think, went through these points very, very importantly, that this is a huge issue. Because even if we had, for example, prevalence issue for Hispanics or Asians, which we could really be comfortable with or confident in, there's evidence to suggest that the children of those, the second and third generations of those people have a different disease prevalence and profile. And so really the amount of variability just becomes important. So we took all these complex issues and we said, where do we go from here? And I think what we had to do was to simplify. We had to go back to the FDA guidance and said, what does the FDA guidance says? And it says, we're looking for sex, we're looking for age, we're looking for race, we're looking for ethnicity. And we said, we're going to pare everything back to that. We're going to go back to the Alawerdi paper. And that gave us the clue, because the Alawerdi paper is based on data coming from Kaiser Permanente, over 600,000 patients, and really excellent paper. And we said, let's look at what we can do with the data we get from claims databases. So what we did was, going back from first principles, we went back to the data from the US Census. I didn't talk a lot about age in this because in our fields, in structural heart, it really is a disease of the older population, not exclusively, but predominantly. And so we took the data looking at the population in the US only over 65, and that was our baseline, our first point of reference. And then we went to the large databases. In this case, we had access to Optum and Truveta. And when we're looking at those, we learned saw some interesting patterns. So we saw that in some cases, they were reporting the numbers with echo and report of aortic stenosis. In some cases, they were reporting patients with a diagnosis of I should specify this as severe.
Did everybody else lose audio? I lost Patrick's audio.
Yes. Yep. Patrick, we can't hear you.
Should I
Now we can hear you.
Okay. Wow. I'm getting all the bad luck. So what I was saying was that we had these different data sources, And we crunched them into a table which looks like this. If I can't do it, maybe I'll ask Kathy to go to the next slide. So again, this is only illustrative, so I don't particularly think it's relevant for me to go through the numbers, but we organize our data in this way. We have the census as a kind of a point of departure, the entire population. We had echo positive data from Optum. Then we had diagnosis numbers from Alawerdi, from Optum, and from Truveta. And from Truveta, we also got treated numbers. And treated numbers also we had from the TVT registry and from the large randomized trials in this area. And you can see, I think, just take one number, an example. If you look at the first line with women in the population, over 65 women make up 55%. And that was exactly what we saw with Optum, which I think was interesting. And this is the interesting thing when you're looking like data and the numbers start to make sense side by side. It's a really good feeling, which I'm sure you said. But look what happens then after that. The numbers which go from an positive echo to diagnose to treatment starts to go down and you can see that number. That's the problem we're trying to fix. Against that, if you go to the randomized trials and those are the numbers we know we have to improve. So basically doing nothing, this looks like the best we can do. So the challenge was to do better than that. And that would be the baseline of the minimum action. And then we try to establish the upper limit, or not the upper limit, but at least the upper target from the numbers of diagnosed patients. But even, I can just point out there, apart from the numbers we have, you'll see even there, a lot of those data are not reported or missing. So that happened a lot. And yes, so in summary, what did we do? We looked at the literature, and I think we enjoy that exercise of looking at all the published sources. But in the end, we really had to, apart from that one paper by Alawerdi, we had to go and rely on unpublished sources, which the FDA does allow in the guidance. It's not the first option, but it says it can be justified. And we looked at the strengths and the weaknesses of each of those data sources, tried to see whether it is in fact the case that we can assume that they are reasonably representative, or at least if they're not, how can we calculate just how unrepresentative they are? And then critically, we became much more aware of the patient journey and seeing where they were dropping off from treatment, from positive echoes to diagnosis to treatment. And based on those numbers, we adjusted our prevalence estimates and came up with a target range to give to Kathy, and hoping that Kathy will work her magic and improve them. And our commitment is to update those data annually, to look at whatever new information comes out. And this year, we're particularly anxious and eager to see the data from the previous study. And let's see what happens. So Kathy, oh yes, we have a slide up. So again, this is a free text. We want you to think of what drivers that you would apply when you developed your target enrollment goals for your action plans. I'm guessing that from what you said earlier on that you're going to use social determinants of health. So maybe later on, that would be an interesting discussion topic to say how you did that. So while you're doing that, I did some closing thoughts. I mentioned already the importance of reducing the numbers of unknowns in our clinical trials. I think that will be one small step to getting a better idea of who we're including and who we're not including. And I also think the better use of our screening data. So particularly looking at screen failures. I spoke about the drop-offs we saw in the databases we saw. And I think that's an area also we have to be careful of seeing a drop-off. Is there anything in our protocols? And my task is to write protocols for the studies. Is there anything in our eligibility that
You muted yourself again, Patrick.
I can't hear you, Patrick. I don't know why we lost audio.
Right, maybe Kathy just move it on.
Yeah. that's okay with you, Patrick. I think we're getting some good answers as to the drivers that would come into consideration when developing enrollment goals. But Kathy, I'll let you take it on.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. And so how do we take the methodology that Patrick just stepped through and put it to action so that clinical research can reflect the population it intends to treat? What we did, in addition to establishing the Represent Tiger team, we actually formed a PI program, and PI stands for Patient Activation, Identification, and Engagement. And the vision of this program is to help increase the generalizability of clinical trial endpoints through collective intention from patient, provider, as well as community partnerships with Edwards Lifesciences. And this is because collective intention takes a village. What does that look like from a patient standpoint? Our goal is to increase the number of participants of women as well as people of color. And we also want to make sure that the patient's voice is heard. And so we do that in multiple ways. One way is every year we invite patients to campus because we want to learn from these lived experience experts. What does it look like from a provider standpoint? We work with referring cardiologists, interventional cardiologists, and surgeons from underrepresented communities. And so we want to always make sure that representation is not just at the patient level, but all the way through research staff. And from the community standpoint, we use a grassroots approach to identify community leaders, community champions, as well as patient advocacy group members who will meet patients where they are in order to address the social determinants of health barriers that Maria spoke about earlier, and to try to also enrich the clinical trial experience. Collective intention is indeed a village partnership, and Edwards, we sponsor that and support this initiative. The PI team offers educational as well as communication tools to address multiple barriers in clinical trial participation. For example, we offer an outreach fund to each of the sites. We also have communication outreach campaign that we're doing with blackdoctors.com. And we have materials that we've passed out to sites to understand the importance of participating in clinical trials and why representation matters. Communicating and reinforcing enrollment goals is a stepwise process. The first step is we communicate what our study level goals are to the sites. From there, we want to make sure that the sites are intimately involved in the process. So we have sites set their own treatment goals that align with our study level goals. And then we've created dashboards to be able to have transparent conversations with the sites. We build scorecards that help provide meaningful track progress meaningfully. This is an example of what a scorecard looks like. The scorecards are provided to the sites, and we will make sure that we are communicating early and often. So we have multiple touch points with the sites, and we discuss their progress. In addition to sharing our insights at our Represent Tiger Team meetings, we also create space for the sites to share best practices. And we do that in multiple ways through newsletters, speaking engagements, as well as podcasts. We want to make sure that we are spotlighting our outreach champions. So key takeaways. First, we want to understand the problem, and in doing so, quantify the problem. And that will help understand the current state. We want to lay out the desired state, identify challenges and opportunities. And there certainly will be challenges, but please understand that it's totally doable. Lastly, we want to put it into action. It does take a needle to move. It takes a village to move the needle, but we want to make sure that we're partnering with multiple passionate stakeholders. And as you all, if you have questions, as you build your DAP and you need support, please feel free to reach out to Regina and myself. We are here for you. And then we've got the MedTech Color community to partner with as well. So in the words of Miranda Priestley from The Devil Wears Prada, that's all. We do want to thank you for your active participation. I'm going to hand this back over to Regina for our Q&A.
Thanks, Kathy. I think Netta is going to jump on board here too. And it looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat, which are awesome. And definitely, I think you can understand the complexity of what we went through in this group when we put this program together. And goodness knows we don't have all the answers yet. Especially as the second question on, healthcare biases, right? Where you're not getting representation due to, these. I mean, those of us that have worked in women's health for years know how much they're summarily dismissed when they show up for anything and have anxiety, right? And you're right. I don't know that we actually have an answer to that one, but for the first question is in the enrollment goal definition, how are you taking into account potential biases that may be driving inaccuracies? And then how can you share priorities of this program, how it's evolved in the current environment? Oh, who wants to take that one?
Kathy, are you coming back on as well? Well, first of all, thank you all for sharing. What I really love about you guys and your team is you're willing to share the good, the bad, the ugly, and how it still didn't stop you doing what you needed to do. So I thank you for that. And I think our community thank you for that. And yes, the question about bias, I wonder if you over-enroll or you plan to over-enroll, but I don't know who wants to take that. Is it Patrick maybe for the first one, the enrollment goal?
That was one of the things we spoke about. I think lots of questions came up. The statistician said that even if you got certain numbers, like what would it mean? What could you do with those data? And certainly it was something we spoke about, but the question was, what would it mean statistically? And secondly, was it possible? And as I mentioned, though, those studies which are only in underrepresented population, I think are really interesting, like the recharge one. And the idea is I think fascinating, which we need to explore. But right now, it's not something that we're implementing. I think right now the immediate need was to respond to FDA's requirement of a DAP and to do it as well as we could within the framework of that answer. In response to the earlier question, I think, Netta, you published an article with Dr. Batchelor recently, and I think that helped us a lot. It came a bit late for us, but I think what it showed us was to remind us that we're in one bubble. You had a nice figure where you showed all the things which had to be done, and it was a good reminder for us that we're in a small part, and that small part by itself is not going to move the needle. It required all the things that Kathy is doing, required all the things that you're doing, your group is doing, and required, I think, the whole area, the whole community to work to do that. So I think that helped us to say, let's not get overwhelmed by the challenge. Let's do our small part and hope that everybody doing a small part will have a bigger effect.
I love that, and I'm hearting it hard. So yeah, it takes a village for truly, as you said, Kathy. Kathy, there's a question here about how are you evolving your site selection to increase representation? And you talked about how you're engaging not just PIs, but the whole community. So maybe you can give a little more insight for the listeners here.
That's a wonderful question. As we continue to embrace the AI age, we are using AI to identify underrepresented areas, sites in underrepresented locations, as well as healthcare providers that we could potentially work with as new PIs. So we build it into the site selection process.
Excellent. So it's the proactive look forward. You're planning for it ahead of time. That what comes out a lot here is the intentionality behind what you're doing and why you're doing it. So wonderful. I know that the one thing that stood out to me when I was working with you all, and you've mentioned it throughout, is this is a volunteer team. And I was like, what? Volunteer? What does that actually mean? But you all believe in this, and then you had leadership and groups that created space for you to do this. So this is over and beyond your regular day-to-day work, right? And maybe, I don't know, who wants to speak to that? Because, and maybe the why behind why you do it, because you each have your own why, and it really is about the people behind the work that matters. But I'd love to hear about that, and I think the team would as well, or the
Yeah.
listeners.
I mean, I'll say my professional mission is to help bridge gaps in healthcare disparities. So this was a non-brainer for me to not only jump at the opportunity to volunteer, but to also lead the initiative. So yeah, just a great passion for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna just jump on that after Kathy. I mean, I've been so lucky. I've been involved. I've had, great leadership and the organizations and external work groups that really invest in health equity, right? And so when Represent was created, it was just a natural extension of that commitment, right? And again, I said, like, especially for women's health, we feel like we're taking baby steps, but I think the pendulum is turning, right? And it might be swinging in the next direction. And when you have equally passionate people that are ready to partner with you and push this forward, and you have support by leadership, I mean, why would you not do this, right?
And I'll just piggyback off of what's been said. For me, this has just been a passion. I've always been invested when it comes to how do we really provide that access to care to underrepresented patient populations. When I was getting my MPH, my capstone project focused specifically on addressing access to care, the disparities, and being able to hone in on what we need to do to really help to address when it comes to those disparities. So for me, I was very excited to even find out about this opportunity.
I would chime in too. I think one key thing, as I think most of us all here are scientists, one way or the other, and it's like incomplete science is bad science, right? So you want science to be complete, and I think it's just the course to do good, as a human being and to improve on the societies that we live in. I'm a trained healthcare professional, so firsthand, I've seen, inequities in our healthcare system when I did practice, and I'm a patient too. I want to know that the therapies that I'm gonna be getting at some point in my life, I want to know that those data points are relevant to me as well, my family, relevant to people in my community, so it makes you have a passion to fix, to help, to contribute, and also at the end to do good science, to be able to improve society. Yeah.
Patrick, did you want to add?
Yeah, I'd say two things. One, I think was being in a company which is very clearly believes in this and is very committed to these ideals was a big help, to as a motivating factor to see that the company was behind it and it was something that was important to it. So that was a big help. And also personally, I think probably you guessed from my accent that I'm from a small place, and especially when I was growing up, it was a very homogenous place, and difference was really whether you're from the north side of the city or the south side of the city, or even religion was also a big issue. And coming into the real world and seeing what difference looked like, I think made me fascinated by it. And I think I agree with what Godfrey is saying, but I think from a personal point of view, I think that the idea of difference and the idea of identity became something I really discovered very late, and have been fascinated by it since.
That's phenomenal. The people behind the work and making the change. And I love that. Do good science. And I know, Regina, you answered the questions to how we're moving things forward in this environment. And I hope what comes across is we're still doing good science, and that's what matters. And FDA's mission is to promote and protect public health based on valid scientific evidence. What's also clear is that you can still submit a DAP or or even if you want to call it a representation action plan to FDA, to show how you're going to be developing a study that's actually going to collect meaningful data to support the safety and effectiveness of the product. So FDA is still reviewing it. Clearly, industry still walking the walk and not just talking the talk. And I think also the fact that Kathy and Regina put their information up there and said, hey, come talk to us if you have questions. This team really wants to help others do the same good science. So thank you for offering that. I think, Kathy, if you could just go to the next slide. I know we're right on time, so I'm really proud of us. We're going to respect your time. I know it's 3 p.m. over there. What we wanted to say is you'll probably meet a lot of the Edwards team and many of us from MedTech Color, as well as we're going to be hosting our 9th annual networking breakfast at the MedTech conference that's hosted by AdvaMed. The breakfast kicks off the conference in our mind, and it's at 7:30 a.m. on Monday, October 19th. The MedTech conference this year is in Boston. So come early, come bright. You're welcome to sponsor, you're welcome to participate, but that's our in-person big event, and we're really excited with having Tennille on board as well. And if you have any questions, there's the QR code. You can scan it, get it on your calendar now. And come and ask Kathy and Regina and others how they're doing it. And we're hoping that eventually we can reignite our collaborative community and do some active work as a collective to continue to move this work forward. So thank you for your time. Tennille, am I missing anything? I know you came back on screen.
Oh, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you to Edwards for this wonderful conversation. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And the conversation doesn't have to stop here. You'll definitely get this recording afterwards. And please stay engaged. We just appreciate you.
And become a member of MedTech Color. And we're probably going to send you out a follow-up survey, small monkey survey. We welcome your feedback. And I'm actually going to ask the Edwards team, maybe in a year's time, you can come back and update us on your progress and continue to share the learnings with the greater community.
Gladly.
Thank you. What a great partnership. Thanks for having us.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye
Bye.
now.